In the beginning, God created relationships between God and angels, God and man, and between all of us. Through the love of God and the peace of Christ and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit, we are all interconnected. Come join Pastor Penny Schulz and Kristen Scharrenberg as scholars, counselors, travelers through the Holy Land, and warriors in Christ, while they explore the fascinating, the difficult, the obscurities, the oddities, and the hope of God's holy word. They will discuss what those scriptures mean to us and how living in the Spirit changes everything.
Hello, and welcome to
Live Life in the Spirit.
We are your hosts. I'm Kristen Scharrenberg.
And I'm Pastor Penny Schulz.
We are so glad you took some time out of your busy day to join us for some joy, some inspiration, a little bit of fun, and some food to chew on for sure.
We are still excited as we embark on this new journey. In case you did not catch our first vodcast, you can still do that on YouTube or our website, livelifeinthespirit.com, and the various podcast feeds that we are on now. Pretty cool. How many?
I think 9.
There you go. Our desire is to look into the important, maybe weird things of the Bible. As the late, great Dr. Michael Heiser says, if it's weird and it's in the Bible, you probably better pay attention because it's in there for a reason.
So this is a place we're going to tackle the tough issues we face every single day. Those issues are real, they affect us, and they're going to range from the spiritual and supernatural through the angelic realm to those who fell, those who God put to watch over us, the Mount of Assembly, the little g gods of this world, what Genesis 6:4 really means, the Nephilim.
We're going to look at the alien UFO phenomenon and how on earth did a donkey talk and why is it even in the Bible? Today we're going to actually look at serpent stalking too.
Oh wow.
Does the Bible talk about witches, sorcery, divination, zombies, the prophecies of the last days? And where do we fit into all of this and how does it impact our relationships? Our walk with God and how we view ourselves and the world around us. And most importantly, where do we go for answers and what does the Bible have to say? Now all of this is going to be discussed from a biblical, not a worldly perspective. Because once you know, you can't unknow.
So amongst all of that doom and gloom, where does our joy come from? And what does it mean to really live in the Spirit? And by doing so, how does that intersect with our dash? What is the dash, you might even ask?
That's a good question.
Thanks. The dash is the space between your birth date and your death date.
Now for those tuning in for the first time, we're going to start off each show with the meat, potatoes, the facts, the issue, or the questions, and we're going to dig into for each episode.
Then towards the middle, we'll make some time for a little joy and laughter.
That's my favorite part.
Yeah, definitely. After that, we will move into our last segment and tackle, what do you do with that? So this is where we will talk about why you should care about the topic, how it applies to your life, and what you can take from our show to help you out in the world we live in.
So before we dive in, let's take a moment to introduce ourselves. So who is Kristen? Well, she's been actively involved full-time in the health and human service field for over 15 years, working with people in recovery from mental health and substance use disorders. She's a mom of 2 very energetic and inquisitive adopted boys in middle school. Her passion is to help lead others to the truth, especially others who, like her, did not realize that they'd been led astray. She's my friend and definitely not the one you want to take into a don't laugh situation.
I can't believe you'd say that. So who's Penny? She started out in the medical field and then God moved her into the ministry over 24 years ago. She's actively been a shepherd to many congregations and a variety of denominations. She's a mom to 3 amazing young women. She's also a wife to 1 patient, tolerant, and very lucky man. Penny's passion is to help all find the light of truth in this dark world. Her aim is to reflect God's light into the broken vessels and cracked pots of this world, including herself.
I got some pretty big cracks.
She's my friend, and she's the gal who will say what is on everyone's mind.
Well, this is the meat and potatoes portion, the part where we will be digging into our topic. We have done some pretty amazing things and walked in some pretty amazing places. Wearing these shirts seems kind of fitting for today's topic. Hang on, let me overthink this.
We're both pretty good at that too.
We are.
It's like we had the shirt for a reason.
I know. You know, kind of like The Lion King. If you've watched the first one, the sequel came out and it was called Lion King 1.5, before the beginning. Mm-hmm. Well, that's actually where we're going to be going today, is before the beginning. Because you can't win a battle you do not know that you're fighting. Or who you're fighting.
That's true. So if you're a military admiral or general, would you go to war without knowing your enemy? What if you didn't know if it was one person or an entire army? And if it was an army, how many do they have in their army?
What about their typical strategies? Or what are their weaknesses? What is their ammunition? Do they fight fair? You wouldn't charge in without being prepared.
That's so true.
Why do we feel so unprepared?
Well, if you're like me, you've read the Bible or heard someone talking about a story in the Bible and you think, boy, I've read that passage a bunch of times and I did not get that from it. Or I haven't even heard that story in the Bible before.
I can remember as a kid saying that exact same thing when the pastor would get up and he would read the scripture and there would be a whole story unfold and it's like, I read that and I didn't hear that story. I get it. You know, today we're going to be looking at a lot of different things. We're going to be looking at why. We're going to start off with maybe why we don't know the stories of the Bible. Why we don't understand those passages. And it's not always our fault.
No.
No. You could have read the same passage over and over, but there's one huge important key factor that you may not have picked up on, and that is translation.
That's true.
Or our biblical founding fathers sometimes changed a word or two because they didn't like it. It made them feel a little uncomfortable.
Well, that seems like not a good thing.
No, but it changed everything. Or eliminated everything.
A big chunk.
Yeah.
Well, and even the language that it was translated into sometimes like wouldn't have the same word. I know like English has like the word love, and in Spanish they have like 5 or 6 different words for that same one word that we have.
And Greek has 3.
Right, you know, and so even that simple word translated in different languages, if we didn't have a matching word, then they just pick the closest, and I don't know, maybe second best isn't always the best.
No. And it changes the flavor.
Oh,
Now,
absolutely.
the overall arcing here, you know, I don't want people to get all upset thinking that we're saying that the Bible's not the infallible work of God. It is.
It is.
But it was written by man.
Right.
And does it change the overarching story of the whole Bible? No, it does not. But when you miss out on those little translations, you miss the bigger picture.
Right.
You miss that fullness. Or like you said, the different variations of love. Well, that makes a big difference,
Right.
which type you're talking about. And if we just interject love,
You miss the meaning.
You miss the meaning. That's why it's so important to not just look at the different translations, but you really need to go back to the Hebrew, or the Aramaic, or even the Septuagint, the Greek text.
Because that's what the original texts of the Bible were written in, those 3 languages. So I would imagine that's probably what led you to studying Hebrew.
That's true. You know, when I went to Israel the first time, I really had no desire to learn Hebrew. And I didn't know it when I went the first time. But when I came back from Israel in 2019, I decided I wanted to take Hebrew. And I started with modern Hebrew, so that way I could speak it and read it and all that kind of stuff. And then when I got done with that, I went into biblical Hebrew. And it's amazing the difference between modern Hebrew and biblical Hebrew. In fact, even some of the words there are totally different. But, you know, reading some of those passages, like we're even going to get into a little bit with Genesis today, and looking at 1 Samuel, when you know more of the story of David, there are words that have been translated differently than what they really are in Hebrew or mean. And it does change the flavor and the fullness of that story.
And I think it makes us miss sometimes the richness.
Yes.
And you always talk about the thread that you can pull throughout. And if the translation is off, you can miss that.
Right.
And that's sad because it misses the view of God of this incredible artist creating this amazing tapestry where everything blends together. And
Yeah.
we don't want that.
No, we don't want that. And that thread that goes from the beginning of Genesis all the way to the end of Revelation. And I had a pastor that always said that she would love to take the Bible and rip the back cover off, because that's not the end of the story. It's just the starting of another one. And so true. Well, okay, and so another thing we kind of looked at with you, what you were talking about with how you grew up. You know, I was very fortunate. I grew up in a really small church, rural church kind of, and I just assumed that everyone, if you went to a little small church, kind of grew up the same way when you had church and Sunday school and Bible school. And I found out that's not the case. All those stories I learned and we dug into, and shoot, my elementary Sunday school class in 5th and 6th grade was already studying Revelation. You ask the adults how many people even know it's a book of the Bible. You know, they don't even know the main stories. And I thought, how is that even possible? So I started doing some digging, and I found this out more and more with the different churches that I shepherd, that even the older crowd that had been in church for years and years, they do not know the stories, let alone being able to dive in and dig into that meat and potatoes of it. So I did a little research, and you know, I found it really interesting that when it was polled by the Pew report, it said about 205 million people in America say that they're Christian.
That seems like a really big number.
Yeah, 69%. That's 7 out of 10 people say, yep, I'm a Christian. But you know, it's really interesting if you start looking into, okay, how many are active Christians? And the sad thing was, for me, active, I didn't have a choice. That was 4 Sundays a week.
That's right.
But their term of active Christian was going to church once maybe twice a month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, not a week.
Yeah, a month.
A month. And that dropped all the way down by 2/3. It fell, and then they said, you know, in 21, it went from 2019 to 34% to 28% in 2021. But actually, Dave Olson, he's a director of church planting in the Evangelical Covenant Church, and he did a much fuller, extensive survey on that, and he found that actually it shows the percentage of Americans that regularly attend church, and that's once a month, is down to 18%.
Well, and I can say, from my perspective on things, I grew up in the church. I was there every Sunday, and I was involved, and I was in youth group and Sunday school and Bible school, or vacation Bible school and all of that. And I heard the stories, but I can't say we dug into them.
Yeah.
We heard the stories enough to memorize the cute parts of it or whatever, and we might have dug into it some, but even back then, so much more of it was focused on today and current events, and not that we don't need to know how to apply the Bible today, but if that's all we focus on and we're not getting that foundation, then we really have nothing to grow from.
Right.
And
like the 10 ways to love your neighbor, which is great, but
if you just learned the 10 Commandments,
there you go.
You got it.
Yeah, or 5 ways to have a better marriage. Well, that's good too, but we're not digging in. When I was growing up too, a Bible study was a huge thing. We had Sunday school, we had Bible study, and for most people, that's just not even a thing anymore.
No, we do book studies, or we do study of, not secular books, but not the Bible. We're not picking apart, we're not looking at, okay, we're going to study John for the next, 3 months or whatever. It's someone's interpretation of a few parts of the stories in the Bible and what we think about what they think. And that's definitely not giving us the steak to chew on.
No. Just like with David, we all know David and Goliath. We know that story. But most people don't have a clue anything else about David. Or Joseph. They know Joseph, the coat of many colors, because they went to the musical or saw it on TV, but they don't know the story. Or let's back it up to Noah. Who here actually knows the real reason for the flood and the real reason for Noah?
Oh, I do. Now. A year ago, maybe a year and a half. Not so much.
Yeah, well, we're going to dig into that. But we're going to go even back before that. In Genesis. Why is the creation story in there? Who wrote it and what was the reason? But we're going to go before that.
Before
the beginning. So, before we can get into the whole God created the heavens and the earth, there was something that was going on before that, and that was called the fallen realm. Now, maybe you've heard that, maybe you haven't. And what is the fallen realm? The fallen realm is our angelic brothers that he created before us. They would be our older siblings, so to speak. You know, and I thought your inquisitive sons really were grilling me today after church with 100 different questions.
You're welcome. I'm glad they're asking you for change instead of me.
But that was good because they were asking, they were wanting to know, you know, the whole thing. If God knew that Adam and Eve were going to sin, why did he put the tree in the garden to begin with? And we talked about that with free will. And then the same way it got us into the angels. And he goes, well, if he knows the angels are going to sin, why did he even create the angels? Because he gave the angels the same free will that he gave us.
Right.
And we see right here in the beginning that we kind of miss. This is in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form or void. It says chaos was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the Yam, if you read that in Hebrew. Now, if you just read that, you think there's just water everywhere, right?
And it's just a messy world.
Yes, it's
Just chaotic. Yeah.
static.
Great.
That's not really what the Hebrew is getting at. In the beginning, God had created the angels. We already have the fall.
The first fall.
The first fall, that's right. And why did the angels fall? Well, because they were given the same free will we were. And unfortunately, there were some that just up and decided that they thought they could do a better job. Quite frankly. They wanted to bump God off of his throne. And that didn't play out too well.
No, didn't go in their favor.
Mm-hmm. So we find out that chaos is not a matter of state. It is actually an entity. It is the chaos dragon, or as the Egyptians call him, Apophis. Mm-hmm. Did you know that the Chinese also worship the chaos dragon?
Well, it seems like every culture has the same entities with different names, all the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much. So when God splits chaos, he's basically subduing him. And from that, he creates, I guess, our heavens. Heavens is still there. I think that was kind of just a term. But then our earth. Mm-hmm. And then it goes in to tell the creation story in chapter 1, and then you get to chapter 2, and that's when God creates the animals. And I'm really excited because in a couple weeks, we are going to have a special guest, maybe even next week, I don't know, I'll have to see.
Yeah, we'll have to see.
We're going to have a special guest who is actually a science teacher. He was on the Israel trip with us, and he's very knowledgeable in all the different ideas and thought processes out there about dinosaurs, and even how the Ice Age might have happened, or how, yeah, and just how old these dinosaurs really are. It's amazing the things that they've just uncovered. You think you know.
Right.
What's coming, and then all of a sudden, what happens when scientists have unearthed things
that don't match the paradigm that they've been living in and telling everybody for a long time?
It can rock your world. So I'm really excited. We're going to have Philip coming up soon. Yeah. So when Philip calls in, then we will get a chance to dig in a little deeper with the animals and where the dinosaurs fit in and all that kind of stuff. Then, yes, God creates man. Mm-hmm. Now, he didn't need to.
Nope.
But he wanted to. Now, when he created man, and this is another thing that people don't catch, it says he created man before he placed him in the garden.
Right.
So man was made outside of the garden and placed in a garden. And the garden was the Garden of Eden. Yes. Now, here's another little interesting tidbit not too many people think about.
I hadn't until you talked about it.
Yeah, so you have Eden, which is in just a little corner, right, of Israel. And Israel is about the size of New Jersey, so in the grand scope of the world, we're talking itty-bitty little area.
Right.
And yet God had created this garden for man, and he had brought in all these animals, and he let Adam name them, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. But then God notices that what? That there's not a suitable helper.
Right.
And he needs somebody.
He needs a companion. Right.
So that was another thought. I had people ask, well, why didn't he just create Eve from dirt? Well, he did, but he also created her from Adam's rib. As we look, once we get into a little more with the whole dinosaurs and the genome of the species and everything, who could have been on the boat, who would have come off the boat, and how did they all come from? It's if they could mate with each other. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole thing, Eve had to be made for Adam. And so in order to be in the same species, he needed to create her from. Yeah. And they were in the garden, and that's the thing. We don't know how long they were there.
And we don't know how long Adam was there before Eve came along.
Exactly. There was only one rule. What was the rule?
Don't eat from the two trees in the middle. The knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life.
That's right.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty simple rule.
Yeah. Well, and we see that in chapter 2, it ends with, and they were both naked, the man and the wife, and they were not ashamed. Well, of course, why would they? All the animals were naked.
Right. Everything God created was just as he created them.
Exactly. So there would no difference.
Right.
There was no shame of any kind. It was pure innocence. So we look at chapter 3. And as we get into chapter 3, it says, now if this is in your translation, it'll say, now the serpent. Now here's the problem. In Hebrew, it's called the Nakash. Now the Nakash can mean serpent. It also means the shining one. The seraphim, which is one of the ranks of angels, is also known as the shining one, which could be Nakash. Because it says the serpent was more cunning than the rest of the beasts of the field.
Well, that doesn't make sense.
No, because the snake is not a beast of the field.
Well, and animals can't be cunning.
Right. Especially if they're in a garden with no sin.
Right. Unless they brought the sin with them.
Exactly. And why would, if it was the Nakash, which would be one of the fallen realm, why would they want to kick Adam and Eve out?
Good question.
They were jealous.
Yeah.
Unbelievably jealous, because the angels had already fallen. There was a third of them that had been swept out of heaven, that had fallen to earth. Yeah, so they were not happy when they saw that God had created man, and he was taking delight in man. He walked in the garden with man, and then he made woman, and that just made him even madder. So it says that the Nakash then, he sidles up. Now he didn't go to man first. He went to the woman, and he starts tempting her using, he says, so, can you eat from anything here? She goes, oh, well, we can eat from everything but the two trees. But then she adds something. She says, because if we eat from it, if we touch it, we will surely die.
Right.
Now, he was smart, because he knew that God didn't say, if you touch it, you'll die. He just said, if you eat it, you'll die. Now, that didn't mean that they were going to die instantaneously, just that it would start
to change
the cycle. But they didn't know that. They didn't know what die was.
No. Really, because they didn't experience that. Because they were living in perfect.
Exactly. How could you even comprehend what that would be? Anyway, so what I love about this, she's looking at it, and when she decides that at first she rationalizes, oh, look good to be food. And it was pretty. And then he says, you realize that if you eat of this, you will be wise like God. That's really what she was after, right?
That would be tempting.
It was tempting, but she didn't even know what tempting was at that point.
No, all of this was brand new.
And how cunning, as they said. Sorry, this is not a snake. No. So anyway, he uses the words against her. Uses her own desire. And why would he know what that desire was? To put that in her? Because that was his desire. Right? That's exactly why they fell in the first place, because he wanted to be like God. Yeah. So he talks her in dating it. And she does. And then she sees Adam and
gives him some too.
Because what had happened? She touched the tree, touched the fruit. Did she die?
Nope.
Nope. Oh, well. She added that part, but...
Maybe it's not so bad.
And she ate it.
She was still around.
That was good. Yeah, even ate it. Told she would die and didn't know what that was, but nothing had changed.
Right.
Wasn't until Adam ate of it that it says then their eyes were open. But here's the interesting thing of all of this. It doesn't say that all of a sudden they knew good and evil. It says they realized that they were naked.
Right.
Of all of the things. They didn't feel guilt. They didn't feel remorse. They didn't feel... They felt shame. Yeah. You know, and that's almost a whole episode on itself. That's like really, really deep where this comes from. So then they hid and they picked out fig leaves, which I thought was so interesting because of all the leaves over there, the fig leaves are the smallest.
They're pretty small. They would have to take a lot of fig leaves.
Pick the bigger one.
Yeah.
And I said, and then they sewed the leaves together. I want to know where they learned how to sew and how they had the stuff to sew it together. But the big thing is they were hiding. And here we see that God is walking through the garden. And he says, where are you?
Pretty sure he knew.
I think he did. For those of you who are parents out there, I want you to think of a time that maybe you lost your kid, your child, maybe in a department store, hiding under the clothes, or in the house and looking all over for them, and you're getting frustrated. Well, God knew where they were at. He says, where are you? And it says, and the man jumps out and he says, I was hiding because I was naked.
And I was ashamed.
And God says, he doesn't get mad at him. He doesn't chew him out. He doesn't say, I knew you would eat that fruit. He says,
who told you?
Yes. Who told you that you were naked? And then he says, did you eat of the fruit?
Just checking.
And what does Adam say?
It was her.
She made me do it. And what does he say? The snake made me do it. That's right. The serpent, the Nakash. And then we get into this whole interaction between the repercussions now of what's going to happen. And the interesting thing right here is we start to see, if you know what's going on, this part is talking about the prophecy of Christ. Because he says that there will be an enmity put between you and the woman. And that the serpent's offspring will be at war with the woman's offspring. And that he would bruise his head, well, he would step on his head, and the other would bruise his heel. That's actually talking about Christ coming.
Right.
It is the Antichrist spirit that has always been around in every generation, looking for just that moment. But it's already talking about Christ in here.
Because Christ is the one that's going to crush his head.
That's right. But he kept trying all along to snuff out the possibility.
Right.
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack in this. If we know that Adam and Eve get kicked out of the garden then, but what is it that God puts in front of the door, the gate?
Another angel.
A cherubim. And if you know anything about cherubims, they are scary looking. They're not like what we think of as angels. In fact, most of them are not. The seraphim are known more as a serpent type looking.
They could
angel.
Look serpent, dragon, that kind of look.
Shining, bronze, shimmering.
What about the cherubim? I always, in Disney's version, they're cute little baby-looking things. No?
No. If you hear about, it talks about Metatron and some of the other ones, like they have 100 eyes and they have all these wings, and they're kind of nasty-looking dudes. You'd be scared spitless if you saw one. And if it's sitting there with flaming swords in front, I'm pretty sure
nobody's going to
go back.
Yeah. Don't be like, it's been fun, thanks.
But here's the thing. God could have stopped it right there.
Right.
He could have said, enough, you messed up, we're done.
My ideal, perfect world can't happen now, so I'm done.
Yeah. But what does he do? Now, those fig leaves would not have lasted very long.
No.
Especially not in Nebraska wind. I mean, it would be gone that quick. No, he fashions them a garment out of what?
Well, animal skin, leather.
And where would you get the animal skin?
They would have had to kill an animal.
So there had to be consequence, severe consequence. There had to be a sacrifice in order to get the animal skin to clothe them. And that sacrifice would be an ongoing one. Well, why does this bring this up to all this? Because once they are out of the garden, right? Now they have to till the land. They have to procreate. They will die eventually because they're not going to live forever.
Right.
And that's why God moves them. And if you notice, there's a place in verse 3. I don't know how many people we've ever read that caught that. He said there's the us.
Right.
The big us. You see that twice.
Right at the very beginning.
Yes. Let us create man in our image. And now you say
we don't want them to be like
us. Yeah, eating from the tree of life and living forever. Hence why, yeah, now that they know, once you know, you can't unknow. So they get kicked out. And they have Cain and they have Abel, and like any sibling rivalry, Cain kills Abel. But Cain goes off, and this gets into a whole other thing. I have talked to many people, because why did Cain not want to leave? He was scared to death. He said, for they will kill me. Don't send me out there. Who's they? Who's they? Unless we already have the fallen realm that was here.
Right.
Which goes along with the Nakash. And why do I say this? Like, I think it's pretty much linked up. Because if you look later on, Cain becomes the father of the Canaanites. Okay, where did all these people come from? But he's worshiping the Canaanite gods. And who are the Canaanite gods? Little gods? It would be the fallen realm.
Because that's what everybody else worshipped, was the fallen realm.
That's right. That's right. So when you look at the creation story, do you know who wrote Genesis?
I do. Moses.
And he wrote how many books?
5.
He wrote the first 5 books.
The Pentateuch.
Yes, the Pentateuch. Yeah, so why the Torah? Why do you think that God wanted that included? You have to realize how much distance had gone from Adam to Moses. I mean, the stories have been passed down.
Yeah, there was a lot that happened. Yeah, everything was a verbal tradition up to that point.
But he wrote it down, and why was that so important? Because every culture at that point, before that, all had a creation story.
I bet they weren't the same as our creation story.
Oh, they were all from creator gods. And if you look at Babylon, really is what you kind of see. The Canaanites had El and Lil, and then you have Babylon, which was Marduk. And they all have multiple gods, and they're fighting it out, and they're jockeying for position, and I mean it's all about, and then the people are just like a happenstance that are later, if they even show up, and they're just to serve. They're to be the slaves of the gods, and it's always punishment, and it's always doom and gloom, and
doing anything you can to appease them so they might trickle a little blessing down on you.
Exactly. And how is that so radically different from our God Yahweh?
Well, we have a God of love.
Yes. He created man so that man would worship him, but from free will.
Right. And out of relationship.
Right. He was the only one that was walking in the garden.
Right.
And didn't punish Adam immediately. Didn't kill him, didn't smite him, didn't smote him, didn't whatever. He made another way.
Right.
And he kept working. That's what this whole book is about, is redemption. From page 1 to the very last page in Revelation. It's all about redemption. You will not find that through any other creation story.
Right. Which was, I'm sure, why Moses was directed to write it down, because it is vital.
Mm-hmm. Vital. And I'm sure a lot of people never even thought about that, though, too. Moses, who actually wrote this down, who was he subjected to? What creation story did he know?
The Egyptian one.
Egyptian one, that's right, with Osiris and Ra and Isis and that whole same thing, fighting it out, duking it out. That had to have been eye-opening for God to really reveal all this of what took place.
Right.
And why it was so important.
Yeah.
to write it down.
For sure. Because Moses didn't just know all of this strictly from oral tradition, but also from God.
It was divine revelation. But Moses also was one of the few that had a relationship with God.
Right.
And, just as a little side note that's kind of fun, besides Adam and Eve seeing God walking through the garden, they would have seen him from what, knees down? It is Moses and the elders who go up on the mountain and they see his feet, they see his ankles, they see his knees. Kind of neat.
Incredible, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Talk about your mountaintop experience.
Yes, and how things just kind of circle around.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so our meat and potato portion here, which is kind of looking at the nuts and bolts of Genesis, is way deeper than what we realize, and a lot of people don't even think about the fallen realm before. And their whole purpose was to try to kick man and woman out of the garden because they were jealous, they didn't want them there, and they succeeded. And God could have called quits, but he didn't.
Right.
He still kept making a way.
That's right.
But the fallen realm did not stop.
Because they continue to nip at our heels.
Well, and they did with Cain.
Right.
Canaanites, and then that moves it up through
Really up to Noah.
Noah, and we're going to get into that much deeper, but that's kind of down the road, and then the Tower of Babel and Nimrod, and just, before we ever get to Moses, there was a lot that took place that most people don't realize. And again, if you're just reading your Bible and you're just kind of blowing through it, and you're just, reading it to read it for sake and not chewing on the verses and asking the questions, you miss so much stuff.
Or even having maybe 2 or 3 different translations of the Bible so you can see the difference and kind of play on that, or having a study Bible that offers like where the translations came from and how they came to that, or it also could be translated as da-da-da-da-da. It allows you to have more to chew on.
That's right. That's right. Which only makes you ask more questions, which is good.
Yes.
Questions are good.
Yeah.
You should never stop asking questions and searching for those threads.
Right.
Because they will open up so much.
Well, and it is the continuation, like our faith and our relationship with God shouldn't be stagnant. It should continue to grow and deepen as we get older and ideally more wise and hopefully more knowledgeable.
Even without eating the fruit.
That's right. Well, I think probably it came through a little bit. So we're going to take a minute, kind of lighten up a little bit from the seriousness of our conversation, and we're going to take a little joy break. I went through and found a funny story that I just started reading. I thought it was really funny, but I didn't finish it. So hopefully it continues to be funny and is completely appropriate for all audiences. So this is titled Women's Public Restrooms. So totally clean. Way to go. For all men who wonder what goes on in women's public restrooms. My mother was a fanatic about public toilets. As a little girl, she'd bring me into the stall, show me how to wad up toilet paper and wipe the seat, and then she would carefully lay strips of toilet paper to cover the seat. Then finally, she would instruct me, never sit on a public toilet seat. She would demonstrate the stance, which consisted of balancing over the toilet in a sitting position without actually letting any of your flesh make contact with the toilet seat. By this time, I'd have wet down my leg and we'd have to go home. That was a long time ago now. Even now, though, in my more mature years, the stance is excruciatingly difficult to maintain when my bladder is especially full. When you have to go in a public bathroom, you find a line of women that make you think that there's a half-price sale on Michael Jordan's underwear in there. So, maybe he's old. I was going to say, insert star from this decade there. But anyways. So, you wait and smile politely at all the other ladies, also crossing their legs and smiling politely. You finally get closer. You check for feet under the stall doors. Everyone is occupied. Finally, a stall door opens and you dash, nearly knocking down the woman leaving the stall. You get in to find that the door won't latch. It doesn't matter. By that point in time, you're going to use it anyways. So you hang your purse on the hook, you yank your pants down and assume the stance. Relief, more relief, and then your thighs begin to shake.
To take your mind off of it, you reach for the toilet paper. The toilet paper dispenser is empty. Your thighs shake some more. Then you remember the tiny little tissue that you blew your nose on. It's in your purse. It will have to do. You smooth it out as best you can. Make it as puffy as possible. It's still smaller than your thumbnail. Someone pushes open the stall door. Because the latch doesn't work, and your purse whams you in the head. Occupied! Occupied, you scream as you reach for the door, dropping your tissue in a puddle and falling backwards directly onto the toilet seat. You get up quickly, but it's too late. Your bare bottom has made contact with all the germs and life forms on the toilet seat because you never laid down the toilet paper. Not that there was any, even if you'd had enough time. And your mother would be utterly ashamed if she knew her bare bottom never touched a public toilet seat because, frankly, you don't know what you could pick up. By this time, the automatic sensor on the back of the toilet is so confused that it flushes. Sending up a stream of water like a fountain. So it's kind of like a bidet. Then it suddenly sucks everything down with such force that you grab onto the toilet paper. Oh, this is so funny. I should have read this. Wow. That you grab onto the toilet paper dispenser for fear of being dragged to China. At that point, you give up. You're soaked by the splashing water. You're exhausted. You try to wipe yourself with a chicklet wrapper you found in your pocket, and then you slink out inconspicuously to the sinks. Oh my gosh. Oh, you can't figure out how to operate the sinks with the automatic sensors, so you wipe your hands with spit and a dry paper towel and walk past a line of women still waiting, cross-legged and unable to smile politely at this point in time. One kind soul at the very end of the line points out that you're trailing a piece of toilet paper on your shoe as long as the Mississippi River. You rank it up from your shoe, plunk it in her hand, and say warmly, "Here, you're gonna need this." At this time, you see your significant other, who has entered, used, exited the bathroom, read a copy of War and Peace, all while waiting for you. "What took so long?" he asks, annoyed. That is when you smile sweetly, kick him sharply in the shins, and go home. This is dedicated to all women everywhere who have ever had to deal with a public toilet, which is pretty much all of us, and it should finally explain to all you men what takes so long. A chicklet wrapper. Well, you know, in Israel, they did tell us to carry toilet paper in our bags.
And they tell us to carry toilet paper and Kleenex
and wet wipes and everything else. Although sometimes though, they would have toilet paper and you could wash your hands, but you had to pay if you wanted to dry them off with a paper towel.
And then we were in some places in Jordan where they had garden hoses.
Yes, they did.
Water all over the floor.
I never tried to garden hose, yeah.
No. It was a culture shock.
It was.
So,
I don't even know how you finished that one up.
Well, I have one too.
Oh, good.
So, since we were talking about Adam and Eve in the garden, so to be in the spirit of that, there was this young minister who decided he would go calling on his congregants. And so he went over to this one lady and he knocked on the door, rang the doorbell, and she did not answer, did not come. And so he knocked again and rang, and he thought he could hear something, but he didn't see anything. So he left his little business card, and on the back he wrote Revelation 3. And it says, "Behold, I stand at the door, knock, and anyone who hears my voice will come and open the door, and I will dine with him." He goes home. Well, the next Sunday, that little business card shows up in the collection plate with Genesis 3:10 on it. It says, "I heard your voice as I was in the garden, but I was naked, so I hid myself."
That's funny.
Has that ever happened? It's not happened happened to me.
That's good. That's good.
That's why I don't leave business cards. Just what happens in the garden
Stays in the garden.
That's right. So now we come to
What do you do with that? And that's the section of our vodcast that will tell you why you should care about this particular topic and how it really impacts your life today and why it's important and why you need to know.
Well, I'm going to let you kind of take this over at the beginning because this is really one of your biggest passions and why you wanted to do the podcast in the first place.
That's true. So I grew up in the church. There's never been a time that I wouldn't have called myself a Christian, and really for the most part an active Christian, especially in the 1 to 2 time per month definition, but most of the time 3 to 4. I mean, we had a joking term if we planned to miss church sometime. We jokingly called it premeditated sin in our family. Like, we went to church and I was involved in all of that stuff. But as I got older, I, in part, was searching, and I've been searching for a long time. And I didn't really know what I was searching for. But I knew that I wasn't finding it in a lot of the places I felt like I should. And I've come to recognize now that part of what I was searching for was that connection to the Spirit and really living in the Spirit. And then the other piece of that was moving from formula into steak. And I wanted more. I felt like there was more to the stories, and I felt like there was more. And I would hear about things and I would think that sounds like it has potential, but I didn't know where to go to find the answers. And so thankfully, God sent me here and I met you, and you teach those things and you preach from the Spirit, and I had the opportunity to really start digging into some of that. And so I've realized that there were things, I mean, I would have called myself an educated person who was well-versed, well-studied on so many things, even in this world today. And I felt like I was making good choices and making decisions based on what I thought a Christian should do. And I was...
Well, you're making decisions based on the information that was presented to you, but when the information is not truthful or complete, you can't make an informed decision.
No. But I didn't know that it wasn't truthful or complete. And so having that, you've coined a term that I love and also hate. That, this realm that we're talking about, it's active and prevalent in today, and it's continuing to bite at our heels and continuing to try to distract us and keep us from having full relationship with God in any way, shape it possibly can. And so it uses people that don't realize that they're being used, and they become a useful idiot.
Yes.
And that is the term that I both love and hate, because I have certainly been one in my life, and I'm striving very hard to not be one anymore, which means you have to know, and you have to continue to dig, and you have to ask questions, and you have to not take everything at face value and just trust what's presented to you without verifying.
And digging in.
And I can't take credit for that actual term. That comes from Jan Markell with Holotry Ministries. It was just being, not in a bad way, but I mean, just being useful idiots, meaning when we don't know, we can be working right into the enemy's plan and helping fulfill stuff, totally mindless of what's going on.
Which really reflects back to what we said at the beginning, that you can't make an informed decision if you don't have all of the information and the correct information.
Right.
And you also can't win a battle you don't know you're fighting. And so those all together, we have lots of good quotes for today.
We have a lot of good quotes. We've been talking about making t-shirts, so I think we're going to have a lot of t-shirts.
That's right, with a lot of great sayings on them. Probably don't be a useless
idiot. That'll be one of
them.
Once you know, you can't know. No, that's right.
So yeah, this reaching people like me who genuinely are good people, who feel like they're doing the right thing and they're on the right path, that are just misguided and have been given bad information and have really been led by people who either are also misguided or are choosing to go the wrong way and taking people with them.
Yeah. I think for me, one of the frustrations is when I hear people
in the church say, well, why do I need to know the Old Testament? You know, or I don't, why do I even need to know those stories? Or why should I care?
Right.
It kind of breaks my heart, because if you don't know these stories, what is it they say? The history repeats itself,
Right.
and that's exactly what's going on. And that's why we dug into Genesis and we did the before the beginning. Because if you look at the parallels of what happened in Genesis compared to the parallels that happened in Revelation, and if you've ever had a chance to read the Book of Enoch, now the Book of Enoch is not in the 66 canonical books, but that doesn't mean that it is not true. It doesn't mean that the Jews do not know that book, and even Jesus knew that book, quoted from the book. It's in Jude. It's quoted from 2 Peter. So just because it's not in this part here doesn't mean that it's still not vital information.
Right.
So, yeah, even like we talked with translation, and we talked about when one person is maybe a little uncomfortable with a word and changes that word, there's so much parallel to that in Darwinism and evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Change one little thing, even if there's no truth behind it, and it changes the entire culture.
Right.
And it'll change the entire educational system because of one word or one little concept, that whether there's any validity to it or not. And, you know, we could get into all sorts of discussions on who chose the 66 books.
Right.
But again, that doesn't mean that some of the extra biblical text out there is not correct and accurate. Just it did not make
The
Bible for
that.
certain reasons.
Right.
But yeah, so knowing this stuff is what keeps us from repeating.
Mm-hmm.
And it also gives us hope, and it gives us inspiration. You know, when you look at Adam and Eve, I mean, they blew it. They blew it, and God could have called it quits.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he didn't.
Right.
There's consequences,
Mm-hmm.
but he started setting up a way for redemption.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with the fallen realm.
Mm-hmm.
The fallen realm came here, but as we're going to see throughout parts of not only the scriptures, but the extra biblical scriptures, there is a path, I would argue, even for them as well. And we see that even Jesus, from the very beginning of Genesis, right there, he has predicted that he is coming, and that there is going to be this war, and there is going to be a war between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman.
Right.
We are going to be at odds with each other all the way until the very end.
And you know, I can look back now at times, because like I said, I've been searching for a long time, really probably since I got into college, you know, because once you're in college, and for me, I went out of state, so I was really on my own for the first time, and I got to choose whether or not I got up and went to church on Sunday mornings. And I church shopped. I looked for the right church, and I found a few different ones throughout the times when I moved and stuff. I found a few, but they were always missing something. And like I said, now I know kind of what that was, but I can look back now, and there were times when I would really start maybe finding a great group, and I would find an amazing Bible study, and I would really start digging in, and I would really start finding what I was looking for, and then my life would fall apart, and it would make it so hard to continue doing that. Or I would find a church that was so fantastic, or a minister that really did preach from the Spirit, and then something would happen, and we would move, or we would something, you know. Back then, I just said, oh my gosh, why does this keep happening? Now I know what was spiritual warfare. They didn't want me to find that, you know. And that happened when I got here. But I had started gaining enough knowledge that I had what I could to fight it now. I wasn't fighting a battle that I didn't know even existed. And I've learned some tools in order to do that. And I feel like I'm able to continue moving forward. Otherwise, this would have just been another speed bump in a unsuccessful attempt at gaining this knowledge and really growing in my faith.
You know, Paul says that we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but we wrestle against powers and principalities and the rulers of this world. And he's talking about that fallen realm. There are specific ones that have specific hierarchy.
Right.
Just like we talked about with that military general or admiral, you're not going to go into war unless you have an idea of who you're fighting and how they fight and what their tactics are and what their ammunition is and how many there are. You're not going to go into it blindly.
Right.
You know, even David didn't.
No.
David was constantly asking to God, should I go into battle or not? And if I go in, is it going to be successful or not? Are you going to be with me or not? I think too many times we miss that whole key vital part of talking to God. We just want to know, are we going to be successful? We don't say, are we supposed to go?
Right.
Are you going to be with me? Is this part of your plan?
Right.
That's why we need to know these stories of the Bible, because they do repeat themselves. We can see ourselves. We can insert our name into so many of these.
Oh, yeah.
We can feel when you read it as a story of that person's life, you go, oh my gosh, I could so relate. You could just insert my name right here, and that's me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know, when we're talking about this and we talk about what the enemy looks like, and I know we're going to dig into all of this, but I think just a teaser, maybe, start, if you look from the very beginning, deception is his primary ammunition, his primary tactic, and that's what, from the very beginning, I mean, I think I'm sure there were useful idiots all along the way in the writing of the Bible and the translation, because the person that didn't like the way that worded, how easy is it to fight? Again, you can't win a battle you don't know you're fighting. So if the enemy can convince us that he doesn't exist, he's won half the battle right there.
That's right. Change one word.
Right.
One word, and it changes what most people don't know.
Right. And so that's why it's important. That's why we need to know, so that we can start to really dig in and be able to fight, because we are fighting it every day, whether we know it or not.
Right. Well, and the whole deception, as I said, it goes from the beginning. We see that from the Nakash in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And towards the end, we see that it is the serpent, the dragon, who is, again, deceiving. But before that even happens, one of the biggest deceptions that we're going to have going on right now, that's probably going to come sooner than later. All you got to do is watch the news. We're not a conspiracy theorist here, but the UFOs are, more and more and more talk, and the aliens, and the government's finally come out and talked about the intergalactic council that they've had for decades that we've kind of known about. It's not UFOs.
No.
It's deception. It's the demonic realm. And in fact, this will be a whole nother show, but there have been the people who've actually been part of this intergalactic group will tell you, when they have talked to these entities, that it was demonic.
Right.
This was not.
No, this is
Just
not
aliens from another realm. Well, they
they're
are. They're not what we think they are.
right.
That's the biggest deception.
Right.
And they're using that to try to slowly ease it in, so that it's not a big deal. We've actually been dealing with this for a long time, and it's not really that big of a deal, and they're not dangerous, and they're going to be good. No.
Well, and the other biggest deception is, from the beginning of time, the enemy wants you to know you're not saved.
Right.
It's not based on grace. It's all based on works, because that's what all of the other religions in the world are based on.
Right.
It's based on works. It's based on all these gods duking it out, or evil gods that are wanting to oppress and, put their thumb down, and doom and gloom. And we're the only ones that serve a God that it's not on works.
No.
It's total opposite. It is total counterculture. It is based on grace. Yeah. And so the deception is that you're not good enough.
Right.
You're not worthy. What you've done in the past, there is no way that God could ever forgive you. If you felt like this, if you've ever had that loop going through your mind, know that it is not of God, that it is of the enemy.
Absolutely.
And it is complete, full deception at its
biggest.
Core. Yeah, at its core. He wants nothing more than to kick you out of a life with God.
Or make you feel like you don't deserve it, or you haven't earned it, but you don't have to. You don't have to. Just by simply being.
That's right.
You are enough.
And by knowing that we've blown it, just like Adam and Eve, they totally blew it. But, the one difference with Adam, he fessed up to it right away. He didn't try to deny it.
Right.
He didn't try to say, well, yeah, so what are you going to do about it? He didn't. He just owned up to it.
Right.
And he took the consequences, but in God's grace. It was the same with David. David blew it multiple times, but he fell on the grace of God. Because he knew that God's grace would be better than anything that he could ever choose for a consequence, even when it was hard.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard.
But we know even in Revelation, as we say, from the front of the book to the back of the book, there it is again. It is the it is the failings of humanity, and yet there is a Savior that is pushing all the way to the very end for everyone to accept Him, to get to know Him on a personal level, as a relationship.
Right.
That's what it's all about. God walked in the garden. That's a relationship.
He wants relationship with each and every one of us. He wants you to talk to Him. And it doesn't have to be fancy.
No.
Just
Nope, it doesn't have to be a structured, written out, stoic prayer. He just wants you to talk. Hey God, it's me. Sorry. Been a while. That's okay.
I messed it up again. Help.
Unfortunately, a lot of times when we pray, that's where it always goes. It's the help or the get me out of this. Or usually it starts out, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You know, we can just talk to God all the time. Thank Him, praise Him, say, oh wow, that was so cool. You know, I don't believe in coincidence. I always say it's a God incident. There are no coincidences. And it's so neat to be able to sit back and see the joys beside the times when we need to ask for help.
Sure.
And the joy.
There is joy.
Oh, I love the joy. I love the joy so much.
And just even, I mean, we do this driving down the road. Wow, now you're really showing off.
Yes.
Like, that's an incredible sunset. Or you try to capture something on camera and you're like, yeah, no,
It's not the same.
it's not the same. So, remembering that He's God of it all.
That's right. So I want to thank you for tuning in today, and hopefully you got a little inspiration. Maybe you're at a point in your life right now where you're feeling like you totally blew it. Maybe you don't feel worthy. Maybe you feel like Adam and Eve where they just got kicked out of the garden. Maybe you're feeling exposed and naked emotionally, spiritually, and it's all too raw. God didn't leave them in that state.
No. He clothed
He
them.
clothed them. Yep, and it was with a sacrifice. And He does the same. He has clothed us all of our sin with the sacrifice of His Son, Jesus Christ. And He gives us the same free will that He gave not only Adam and Eve and all the other humans, but also the angelic realm.
Right.
To make the right decision, to follow Him, or to go on our own.
So I guess my challenge to you this week is to dig in. If you haven't read Genesis again, go do so and read it from a couple different translations. Read it from the Hebrew. They actually have a Hebrew to English or whatever language you're reading. Look at what the Bible has to say. Read some little extra biblical sources to dig in and find out a little more of what really was going on, because
You need to know. Because once you know, you can't unknow. And until next time,
Bye.